Good evening to all of you. Indeed, very grateful for this opportunity to be piloting you, as she puts it. It's to propose my answer to the question of tonight's debate: does God exist? Also, before I begin, I also like to state that I feel greatly honored to be sharing the stage with my esteemed opponent tonight, Mr. Willie. Bertrand Russell, the great atheist philosopher, was once asked the question, Sir Russell, what would you do, if you stand before God one day at the judgment and God asks you the question, why didn't you believe in me? Now, Sir Russell simply replied by saying, I would tell him, you did not give me enough evidence to believe in you. Interestingly, Richard Dawkins was also asked the same question in a recent interview, and he replied in the same manner. He told the interviewer that, I would ask God in return, Sir, why did you take such pains to hide yourself from me? So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe one of the main objections raised by atheists against the existence of God is that there is no good evidence to suggest that God exists. And so I will definitely take the burden of proof to prove its existence, and I will do so by just presenting. I'm going to be abandoning the classical arguments for God's existence because I'm sure we are quite used to that. I want to present simply four basic arguments which has led me to believe undeniably in the existence of God, and ultimately it's my hope that as I present this, it will also give each and every one of you every undeniable reason to believe in the existence of God. Now, to my first argument. Argument number one, the argument from Messianic prophecy. Let me begin by looking at the Bible. The Bible is divided into two sections, as some of you may know, namely the Old and the New Testament. The Old Testament speaks of the creation of God and how man fell into sin and was consequently separated from God. And since then we see prophecies emerging in a gradual process through many different prophets concerning the coming of the Anointed One. This is Mashiach in Greek, Christos in Mashiach in Hebrew rather, Christos in Greek, from where we derive the terms Christ, Christian, and so forth. Now we call this the Messianic prophecies because they refer to the coming of the Messiah. Barton Payne, in his Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecies, lists close to 200 of these prophecies. Another Oxford scholar, Alfred Edersheim, he goes up to 400 of these prophecies, trying to argue that, trying to present 400 prophecies in the Old Testament concerning the Christ. Now, this is not just one person presenting his predictions like Nostradamus of the future. Close to 30 different men from a span of 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years in fact, different places, different occasions, but all in absolute unity, painting one picture, grand prophetic picture of the coming Messiah. And what makes this prediction so staggering is that they get more and more specific as the clock runs down to the arrival of Jesus on the scene of ancient Palestine. And the interesting thing is he fulfills every one of them. And I mean every one of them to the dot. So let me just give you a quick overview of a fraction of these prophecies. Genesis chapter 3:15 says that he will be born of a woman, indicating his humanity. Genesis chapter 12 verse 1 says he'll be a descendant of Abraham. I'm getting more specific. Genesis chapter 49 verse 10 says he'll be from the tribe of Judah. 2 Samuel 7:12 says he'll be from the descendant of King David. Micah chapter 5:2 says he'll be born in the town of Bethlehem, not the place of his birth. Isaiah chapter 7:14 says he'll be born of a virgin. Isaiah 53 says he'll be tortured and ultimately killed. Now, Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 to 26 says he will be killed in about AD 33, the exact year we believe that Christ died. Psalm chapter 16 verse 11 also prophesies that he will be raised from the dead. So, these prophecies are written hundreds of years, and even the most liberal scholar would say that they are slightly above 100 years before Christ came. And yet, they describe in accuracy the things that Christ would fulfill. So I believe there are a few things we can conclude from this first argument. Number one, there seems to be a transcendent supernatural being guiding these prophecies or predictions and seeing to their fulfillment at the same time. Number two, this transcendent and supernatural being is both timeless and all-knowing. Number three, only God can fit all four of these categories: transcendence, supernatural, timeless, and all-knowing. So it naturally follows, logically follows that Number 4, God exists. Now this argument from the Messianic prophecies proves that the existence of God, not only does it prove the existence of God, it goes, I believe, that no other religion, no other philosophy, scientific evidence, or scientific book, or any metaphysical book can ever come close to matching such prophecies. Let me move on to argument number 2. The argument from scientific limitations, or scientific boundaries if you like. God, by definition, is a transcendent being. He's a supernatural entity. And the Bible clearly affirms that God is spirit. And I think both Islam and Judaism, I'm not reverting my position, but I think Islam and Judaism would agree with me that he is not a physical being. And the Oxford Dictionary defines science as the systematic study of the natural world. Now, here's the problem. If science is indeed the study of the natural world, this raises a question with regards to science being able to define God, because God is not a physical being. Science studies nature, God is not a physical being, so how does that happen? And C.S. Lewis raises this concern in his book, Gone in the Dark. He argues, because, and I quote, because science studies nature, and the question is whether anything besides nature exists, anything outside. How could you find it out? Simply by studying nature. So when we are invoking a supernatural being or a metaphysical being like God, we cannot disprove it simply on scientific grounds. For this reason, I think I'm making a bold statement here. I think even Mr. Willie will agree with me when I say that science cannot totally disprove God in that sense. And I think I heard that science cannot even prove whether there is gold. I'm not sure if it's true. I'm not making a case for this, but I heard that science cannot conclusively prove whether there is gold to be found in the sun. If we can't even know what's in the sun, how can we argue that God cannot exist in the universe? So Michio Kaku, the atheist physicist, made a statement during recently in a forum in Mexico. He says that even 100 years from now, people are still going to be debating the existence of God, and because scientific evidence cannot simply do away with it, it cannot eliminate the God theory, so to speak. Now, and also let me just add a very thing, because it sounds like I'm discrediting science. So let me, on the other hand, let me also say that I don't believe that science itself can lead us to God. So I don't believe that I can use science, because God is a non-physical being. How am I going to use science to also lead to God? So I have to be fair. I would say that, I would concede that science also doesn't lead us conclusively to God. It gives us good arguments for it, but it doesn't lead us there as well. And neither can it disprove it. So please raise these questions in the Q&A. If you're wondering how theologically I arrived at this position, please raise it in the Q&A. So my second argument demonstrates how science cannot disprove God. It's a limited field with a limited capability, and I think God lies beyond those limits. And if now science itself fails to eliminate the idea of God, what excuse can people have for not believing in God? My third argument, the argument from existentialism. Ravi Zacharias once said that existentialism, or rather experientialism, was born as a result of the unpaid bills of philosophy. There is an imminent dryness to philosophy. Sometimes, when we go into philosophy, it fails to address the issues of their heart. And this is why people revert to experiential evidence. And this is why I believe in the importance of experiential knowledge, especially in determining truth. Personal experience, I believe, is also not sufficient to prove whether or not something is true. But at the same time, I think it is a necessary element in determining whether or not the thing we believe in is true or not. Necessary and sufficient. I believe that faith is a feeling of existential confidence, and I must experience it. I cannot just know it up here. I need to experience it. And this is perhaps one of the most compelling reasons that has led me to believe in God, because I'm not just a Christian just because I was brought up in a Christian family. I'm a Christian because I've experienced God for myself. And I'm being honest here in saying that such beliefs are not arbitrary, they're not illogical or incoherent. They are the foundations of our system of belief. Our beliefs are based on certain undeniable experiences, such as, the belief we have in there are other minds like our minds, or the belief we have that in the existence of the past, or perhaps the belief that we have, in the reality of the natural world. All these beliefs are not scientific. They cannot be scientifically proven, but we need to believe them in order to form a other beliefs. These are necessary beliefs. In a philosophical term for such beliefs is properly basic beliefs. It's not just basic, it's properly basic. So, and I think my belief in God, and also those who believe in God, I think our belief is very much grounded on our immediate experience of God. It's not so much just giving arguments on paper, it's also feeling it. And I think unless I'm proven to be a psychotic or I'm proven to be a delusional person, I have every legitimate right to make, to use my experience of God to justify my claim in His existence. So my third argument can be summed up in this way. My experience of God justifies my belief in His existence. It does not prove that God exists. I can't just say, that just because I believe in God, but it also justifies the belief I have. If I cannot feel Him and I say He exists, it is logically incoherent. But at the same time, I'm not forming a superstitious or mystical belief. Finally, to my fourth argument, it is the argument from the fact that you too can experience God. It's not so much that I'm coming to you like a bomo here saying today that I feel God and you need to believe me because of what I say. I'm saying that you too can experience the same God. And I believe that the Bible expresses very clearly that God wants to interact with each and every one of us. It says that we were created for fellowship with God. That was one of the reasons the Bible gives for the reason that man was created. And I believe that if we seek God genuinely, we would indeed find God. So I'm not just making a case that I experience God, therefore God exists. I'm also saying that if you seek God, you too can find God, and that this would also become a proof of God's existence for you. So St. Augustine explicitly states, Almighty God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest. I think there is a certain rest, I find at least, in believing in God. So, the existence of God is not merely a substance of my imagination. My fourth argument demonstrates that God exists, and not only that He does, He can and will be found by those who seek Him. And the fact that you can find this proves that there is no myth, because myths cannot be repeated. So, and I think that there are people here who would testify that they still hear and feel His voice today. So in conclusion, I presented four, not the classical arguments, but rather four simple, basic cases for why I believe that God exists. And let me conclude by saying, Paul, the Jewish skeptic, came to believe in God because of my first argument. He saw that the Messianic prophecies were true. He was a skeptic of Christianity. He came to believe in God on the basis of the first argument. Anthony Flew, I'm sure some of you may have heard of him. He was an atheist philosopher. He came to believe in God due to the second argument, that there is no scientific proof to disprove God in that sense. Anthony Flew came recently to believe in the existence of God as that was one of his reasons why he came to believe. And thirdly, the argument from personal experience, this is why I came to believe in the existence of God, was not just a figment of my own imagination, rather it was a reality to me. And I believe my fourth argument proves that it's not just these people, myself included, can experience God. You too can experience God if you seek Him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua. Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today is indeed a historic day for two reasons. Firstly, a debate of this sort has never happened in Malaysia, as many people have pointed out, at least to our knowledge. And secondly, as Mr. Cox stole my line, this is the biggest official gathering of heathens we've ever had in Malaysia. Ironically, it takes a God we don't believe in to bring us all together in one place like this. Now, we've heard many interesting points from Samuel today, but before I address them further, I would like to establish the position that I will be taking this evening. Now, what strikes me most when coming here and through the introduction and all this is how polite everybody is. Before I actually before we actually walked in the room, I was quickly going through my speech to check whether there were anything which is not polite enough in here, just to make sure that I'm nice as much as possible. However, I would say that making a case for atheism, it is necessary to point out certain things. It is actually necessary to point out certain things which we find unacceptable. And in that case, it may sound a little bit difficult to accept at first, but if you think about it and you reason it out, it will probably come to light for you as well. Just like how if you seek God, in the same way, if you seek logic, it will dawn on you eventually. Right? So, now my atheism is a position of not believing in the existence of God due to insufficient evidence. Note that rejecting belief in God is not the same thing as declaring that God cannot possibly exist. This is an important distinction. we are far removed from these when it comes to our standard of proof, as Samuel was talking about earlier. You being able to feel God, and this being something that can justify your belief in Him. For us, we actually look for evidence when we are trying to justify. And I think that this difference in perspective is actually one of the major issues. We can argue about a lot of things, we can talk about a lot of arguments, but this difference in perspective is actually the only thing. If you make that switch, you become an atheist. If you switch to the other side, you turn into a Christian, right? So, or atheist in general. Now, since definitions of God quite sneakily usually situate Him outside space and time, it is by definition untestable. As Samuel said just now, I'm not coming out here to actually try and disprove the existence of God. If something cannot be tested, definitely, science or otherwise, it cannot be disproven. God claims, however, ascribe Him specific properties we find incompatible with the real world, and they also testify to specific actions that He has taken here in the world to reveal Himself, for which we find there's little evidence and often claim does not make sense to us. Religion also claims that God must exist for a myriad of philosophical reasons, things which I think Samuel did not want to use tonight, but I'm going to bring them up, since that they contain inherent contradictions. And since there is no good reason or evidence, no good reason and no good evidence, we do not believe in God. And this is actually what makes us atheists. Now, both the positions of lacking belief in God versus active disbelief in any such entity are commonly referred to atheism, but the former, not believing because we simply don't think the evidence is good enough, is the one which is far more commonly held amongst the atheist community you guys invited to this debate, and actually worldwide. Now, this will be the position I'm representing today. Some may jump on this and claim that we're in fact agnostics. Although Joshua has mentioned that this is probably consistent, but I will actually justify why this is consistent a little bit later. So just to reiterate, tonight I'll be arguing for the case that there is no convincing reason and definitely no evidence to support the existence of God. Now, going to Samuel's case a little bit, I will get into the full rebuttal during my rebuttal speech later. But how I see his case is he looks for one specific evidence that God exists, which is the Messianic prophecy, and from that, from what the Bible says and how the Bible talks about all these things, that justifies that only a God could have brought that kind of prophecy about, and that since this God, other than that piece of evidence that He has dropped, generally exists outside of space and time, the only way you can really find Him is by feeling Him. Right? So that is what I generally feel. So again, this is a problem with perspective. How you can actually accept that depends on how willing you are to suspend your disbelief. And I think a lot of the case which I've prepared tonight actually already addresses this. So I'm going to get right to it, and some of it will actually be rebuttals. In more detail, I will do during my rebuttal section. So what I will do in my own case is to demonstrate to you several problems with the concept of God, which Samuel subscribes to. Now, usually in debates, I prefer to do point-by-point expositions. However, I'm going to try a different approach tonight. I decided that I would like to instead tell you my whole life story, because I thought it would be more exciting. In seriousness, seeing how someone arrives at atheism quite conveniently highlights the major problems with theism. I will, however, try to signpost the major points of argument so that the debate makes more sense for our audience, and when Samuel jumps on them. Now, when I was a young boy, I went to Catholic missionary schools. There's tons of them in Sarawak. I was exposed to Our Father and Hail Mary every day, and that is likely where my indoctrination began. Possibly due to the family moving around a lot, I was exposed to many different brands of Christianity. I was a mail-order Christian in the early days. I first accepted Jesus as my Savior, reading off a sample prayer in one of the issues of a series on Christian lessons of children. Now, technically, according to some denominations of Christianity, I'm saved, whatever I say tonight, so that is cool. I went to Catholic Church thanks to peer pressure, Methodist Church due to a relative's invitation, a bunch of other churches depending on who I was mixing with at the time. I even attended a charismatic conference. That was the first time I learned that speaking in tongues isn't quite understood by other human beings these days. And my last congregation was the Jehovah's Witnesses. Raise any eyebrows? Throughout most of my school life, I was a hardcore Christian. I read the Bible through multiple times. I went to Bible camps. I preached to my peers. I attempted to heal the sick. Yes, I did that. I was all out. I've been told I can be rather pushy with the worldview and principles thing even today. Believe me, being Christian and being told from the Bible that the blood of the unsaved was on my hands didn't help that very much. However, I never felt that I quite belonged in any specific Christian church. I was looking for explanations to several problems I had with religion at the time, and this brings me to my first major point. If God, described in the Bible, is truly all-powerful and all-knowing, why is creation so imperfect? Why is there evil in this world, from the countless deaths natural disasters caused to the incredible cruelty of nature? What about perpetrated evils like wars, genocide, classmates who don't like you? I was a kid back then. I probably justified this back in the day by declaring that this was the only way to do things and still allow humans free will. And this is a very common answer that I hear. Humans then messed everything up. However, I never found that explanation quite good enough. I could, even as a kid, think of a couple of different ways I would run things if I was God. I would probably drop the Bible down onto the earth with indestructible, flexible carbon nanotube pages, for example, and I'll attach Google Translate to it. I've also always had a problem with hell. How does anyone, let alone an infinitely merciful and loving God, justify torturing and burning anyone in hell forever? Forever is a long time. Suppose a guy lives for 100 years, and every year he kills one person who should have lived 100 years on earth as well. If you're loose and fast with justice, maybe you should throw him in hell for 10,000 years. Okay, let's throw him in hell for 20,000 years just to make sure that the bastard really suffers. But forever, that is a ridiculous proposition by any standards of justice. Also, why create a universe so vast over such a long period of time if you need only one planet and a couple of thousand years for humans? Why create so many different species of creatures, all with tiny incremental differences from one another, only to allow 99.9999% of them to die over eons, and yet bother to save all the ones existing 5,000 years ago in a giant boat? God has described in the Bible obviously didn't feel shy about bending the laws of physics. So why not do that more often? In a sense, I was looking around for a Christian denomination or just any Christian explanation which consistently justifies these rather senseless things to me. This is not looking for evidence. This is looking for a reason, a way to understand why things are the way they are. I wasn't satisfied with just have faith and like God is mysterious as explanations. Now, trying to figure out the correct way to worship God, I still desperately wanted to please Him at the time, led me to question if I was in the correct religion at all. And this is my second point. God has apparently revealed Himself to so many different people in so many different ways and so many different things. Each prophet has his teachings, a crop of alleged miracles. You can, of course, doing some research, say that this is the biggest and most awesome miracle of all. But it depends on where you were born. You might have a different opinion about that. And the alleged accuracy of the revelation is defended by legions of believers with their arguments and their internet pages. In my search, I read a translation of the Quran. I spoke to Buddhist teachers. I discovered that there are seriously a lot of books to read in Hinduism. The irony in this is perhaps that in my quest for the truth, I sharpened my skepticism and increased my standards for accepting evidence. Now, if one of these God descriptions must be true, then the rest must be false. And yet, most arguments you can come up with to defend the existence of one God can also be applied to several other gods. With damnation and hellfire at stake, and considering how, to put it charitably, inconclusive the evidence is to support these revelations, how do you know God, much less ensure that your worship pleases Him? More pertinently, as you criticize and apply a high standard of scrutiny to a different God to your own, how do you not then apply the same level of scrutiny to your own God? Atheist debaters like Hitchens and Dawkins like to remind their audience that we are all atheists with respect to most of the gods mankind ever claimed to exist. You do not believe in Zeus. You do not believe in Jupiter, Amun-Ra, Odin, and countless other gods. We atheists agree. We completely agree. It's just that we are atheists with respect to one more God. Also, what happens to all those people your evangelists never get to? What happened to humans who came before your specific God revelation? What happens to everyone who are born into a culture which predisposes them to a specific religion? And what happens to the 10 million children who die before the age of 5 every year according to UNICEF? Of the many roundabout answers I've heard from my religious bearers, none addresses the question of why such an awesomely powerful God would present humanity with such urgent questions and yet make the answers so convoluted and unknowable. The most likely answer is that He simply does not exist. This isn't like asking kids to eat vegetables, folks. This is more like asking kids to grow the damn things from scratch using seeds which may or may not be there so that they don't die of vitamin deficiency. Now, I came out of all this in university quite firmly and agnostic, although I didn't know the term at the time. I felt that it is perhaps possible that there's a creator since that one conveniently explains some things, but there's no way anyone was worshipping Him the right way, or not even knowing if He wanted worship in the first place. Now, I decided that God and His existence was unknowable, and although I've been a geek, I only started appreciating scientific literacy at university, not thanks to the university itself, and I began to put these things together. This would lead me to my third point, major philosophical arguments for the existence of God say that God is the only possible explanation for design and existence itself, and yet God is actually the ultimate non-explanation to everything, and it is completely unnecessary and irrelevant to our lives. An all-powerful and all-knowing dude outside of space and time whose motives cannot possibly be understood can be attributed to anything you like. Every time you see a car accident or you're saved from one or you win the lottery or there's no traffic jam, God did it. Religion and the God explanation have been retreating in the face of science for centuries now. When mankind's ignorance was at its worst, we thought the sun, the moon and the stars were gods. When we figured out that these were simply big balls which are really big balls of stuff which are really far away, we then thought that God put earth at the center of everything. When we learned that isn't true, we began to refer to life's complexity as something that could only have been designed by God. And now that evolution have demonstrated how an incredibly simple idea can explain all the complexity we see in the biosphere, religion has retreated to claiming that the universal constants of our universe discovered by physicists points to a creator who fine-tuned these numbers so that we may exist. Now the simple truth is we don't know yet why these numbers are the way they are. You see, science doesn't claim to have all the answers, but when it does provide an answer, it actually explains things in a way that makes sense and which is reproducible. Not sometimes, not only in the olden holy book days, but all the time. Yes, there are tons of stuff we don't know as a species, and there may even be some things which science may never be able to explain. However, the correct thing to say when faced with knowledge you do not have is, I do not know. Not God caused it, God made it, or God this, God that. Some things about our universe and existence can actually be discovered and explained, some remain in the realm of speculation and philosophy. Talking about it helps expand our horizon, but if it does not affect physical reality, if it does not, and this is the perspective thing I was talking about earlier, if it does not affect your physical reality in any way at all, then it should not be the focus of your life. I mentioned earlier that I would explain why agnosticism and atheism are not mutually exclusive. Now this would be my fourth and final point. You do not need to actively disprove the concept of God to yourself to be an atheist. Considering that God has become completely irrelevant to me, for all intents and purposes, I am already an atheist. And I discovered this. I didn't actually decide this. Ironically, it was an ex-Christian friend with whom I had a massive falling out partly due to our religious differences, who after 2 years of silence finally explained the Russell teapot to me. And this is a very famous thought experiment. If I were to suggest to you, this is what the thought experiment sounds like. If I were to suggest to you that between the Earth and Mars, there's a China teapot orbiting the Sun, and that this teapot was too small to be seen by even the most powerful of telescopes, but it's just there. Does it mean that everyone who employs, but then if you can't see it, you can't disprove it, but I claim it exists, right? There's no way, since you cannot use any instruments that exist, science basically can't disprove it. Does that mean that since no one can disprove it, everybody should just take me at my word and like, okay, maybe it's there? No, if I were to tell you something like that, you immediately say, prove it to me. Right? So, if however the existence of such a teapot is mentioned in ancient books, taught as the sacred truth every Sunday and instilled into the minds of children at school, not believing in its existence would certainly mark you as an unbeliever. You're certainly special in the situation of not believing in it. And this basically makes 2 points, both equally important. One, if religion wishes to claim that God exists, they have to prove it. 2, thanks to the God delusion, as Dawkins put it, assertions about God is so widespread, Huxley had to invent the term agnostic to define a neutral and non-offending position. Yes, we should keep an open mind, however, we also do not fill that mind with every piece of metaphysical rubbish that anyone would throw our way. Should we be agnostic to Zeus, the invisible pink unicorn, and the flying spaghetti monster as well? No, we're atheists when it comes to all these kind of things. And on the day that this incredibly simple truth dawned on me, I became a free man. Thank you.
Right. I'd like to begin by thanking Mr. Willie for, I think, a genuine case where he explains, he didn't just come out in all guns blazing, just want to attack my arguments apart. Appreciate the fact that he genuinely explains why is it that he has come to this belief that he has not believed in God, and I hope to respond in humility, in response, I hope to respond to them in humility. Now, let me see. He says he rejects the God theory, the fact that God exists because there is no evidence for it. As a Christian, I find this very thing because I find this a bit difficult to accept because I find, now I'm not choking evidence down people who don't see it. I'm just saying that there are lots of arguments which I have not used today, namely the cosmological argument. I have not used them today. The teleological argument which suggests, the fine-tuning of the universe needs to be explained by, either physical necessity, chance, or design. I have not even touched those yet. I have not even come to the moral argument. I don't intend to either, because I'm looking for relevance just as much as he is. I'm not interested in throwing jargons here just for the sake, let's throw some jargons just in front of people. That's not the case. I want to be sincere as he is and explain to you why I've come to this position. And I feel there is ample of evidence in belief in God. Number one, so I disagree with the fact that there is no evidence, but I find there's evidence everywhere. It's like looking at a bottle, I was having a discussion with him just before it began. The topic came up, looking at a bottle half full. One person looks at it and says it is half empty, another person looks at it as half full. When I look at everything around me, I see God. When he looks at it, he says he doesn't see God. So, and he says that there is no convincing use, but no, this is my problem here. If this is the case, and I understood Mr. Willie correctly, his answer to the above question, does not exist, would not be no, God does not exist. His answer would be, I do not know. So if I understood him correctly, basically he's not really asserting that God does not exist. His question to you, his response is, I do not know. He's uncertain. He seems to be uncertain because there is lack of evidence. Now, he also raised up his first objection that if God exists, why is there evil in the world? And he also classically, he brilliantly said that the Christians tend to dismiss this rather too easily by using the free will argument more often than they should have used it. I agree with him. The free will argument should not always be, be used to just dismiss the argument clearly, because the free will argument actually, which says that God gives us free will so we mess it up, hushes the question, but it does not really answer the question. So, in response to this question, why is there evil in this world? Why is there imperfection? Why is there war? Why is there genocide? My answer would be to this, would be to go back to the Bible, look at Genesis chapter 3, and you find that man has fallen. The Bible describes that man is fallen. When I say man is fallen, reason is fallen. Reason is fallen. So everything about man, in fact, John Calvin talks about this as total depravity. He's totally depraved. So even if God was standing right in front of you here today, you would not be able to see him. Not because he's playing a funny game, amusing himself playing a funny game of hide and seek with you. It is the fact that our eyes have been blinded to him as a result of the fall. You want to know more about this? Read just the first 3 chapters in the Bible, you come to this. It is not hidden in deep inside, right at the beginning. So my answer to this is not just free will. The fall tells you, why is it that you cannot see God? Why is it you look at space so big, you cannot find a shred of evidence for God? Moving quickly, he talks about hell forever. C.S. Lewis had a famous quote. He said, there are two, which I'm not saying that I agree with, but here is what C.S. Lewis responds to this question when he was asked the same question. He says that there are 2 kinds of people in this world. One group that say to God, thy will be done. And to them, God embraces them in heaven. And to the other group, God says to them, thy will be done. And in doing so, he sends them to hell. Now, this has been used to disprove to counter the argument that why God sends people to hell forever. But I don't think it's satisfying. I want to go beyond this. Hell, why do people go to hell? Why God pushes them forever is because sometimes we have to ask ourselves the question, do we really want God? Heaven is God's home. Do we really want God? Is there a desire inside every one of us that we want to see God? And if the answer is no, then why do you want to go and be with God? There's only one other place where there is no God, and that will be hell. Hell is not so much, medieval art has painted it in a picture of fire and everything. Is that really what hell is? We know it's a place of suffering, but is it the way medieval artists have painted it? That God is cruelly enjoying torturing people? I don't think so. I think hell is just a separation from God. It's an internal separation from God. If you want to be separated from God, this is my Christian understanding. I'm speaking as a Christian. God gives hell for those who want to be separated from Him. And heaven is those who want Him. And I don't think heaven is how Hollywood makes it, the seven-star suite, like Las Vegas, the floors are covered gold. That's not what heaven is. Heaven is a place of worship, where people get to be with God. So, again, I don't see God being vicious here in wanting to punish people just because they don't believe in Him, or just because you happen to be born on the wrong side of the world, as he puts it. Now, moving quickly, a vast universe. You mentioned that the universe is so vast. Why would God create a universe so vast, and just only keep man, in this part of the thing. Now, you only talk about issues like this when you have limited resources. For example, if I had $100 in my note, and you say, why do you spend $78 on this when you could have used this for something else? You only talk about why someone overspends when they have a limited resources. You could have used your resources wisely in this way. But when it comes to God, ladies and gentlemen, there is no limit to God's resources. The whole universe, everything belongs to Him. So the issue of how vast, why is the universe so vast, is I believe, with all due respect, irrelevant. Because God has no ends. God has no limit. So why would that question even be raised? With all due respect again. So this would be the way I answer that question. Moving on. Why not bend the laws of physics more often than they are? I think God does not just bend the law, because God, I believe, created the laws of physics. God cannot destroy something He Himself created. Why would God do that? I believe God rather intervenes to the laws of physics. If I have this microphone here and I say, that if I drop this microphone, the laws of physics say that gravity would pull this microphone down. That is the laws of physics. And I don't think God destroys the laws of physics or messes with it. I think God intervenes to this. And if I drop this microphone and I catch it halfway through, I've intervened to it. I did not defy the law of physics. I just intervened through it. So we need to understand that intervention of the laws of physics is not bending it, it's not breaking it. God has the power, God has an unlimited capability of intervening through the laws of physics. For example, C.S. Lewis used this illustration. He was talking about, if I put like 10 ringgit in my drawer today, and I were to come back tomorrow and I put another 10 ringgit, laws of arithmetic tell us I would have $20 the following day. But would that really be so? What if a thief has been to it? The thief would not have broken the laws of arithmetic, he would have broken the laws of this country. So we have to get a point. It's intervention. Science tells you, the laws of physics tells you what this would be, what that would be, if there is no intervention. But if there is an intervention, it's not a case of breaking the laws of physics. It's an intervention through it. A higher law, like the laws of gravity is supposed to pull a plane down. The laws of aerodynamics overrule that law. It takes a plane forward. So that would be one way I respond to it. The remaining 2 minutes. Why? Let me go. He spoke about evolution. And to this, I would genuinely want to ask a question about evolution. Evolution, he says, explains it, if I understood it correctly. How on earth does evolution explain how life came about? The theory of evolution itself, developed by Darwin, only tells us when life has already come into being from a cell. Evolution begins from a single cell. But what happens before that cell? How did it come before that cell? Evolution doesn't do that. You have another field of study for that. So how do you explain how at one point of time you have non-existence and another point you have existence? You cannot do that. I'm not reverting to the cosmological argument. I'm not supposed to build another case here. But I'm just raising a question with regards to evolution. Evolution doesn't explain anything. Evolution is not provable. It's a science, I think Dr. Cox said today, science is repeatable. Do we find evolution repeating itself again? We can't, if evolution is a sticky word here, okay, I'm remaining 30 seconds. Evolution is a sticky word. If you're talking about evolution as a species changes, yeah, I believe in it. Microevolution, I believe in microevolution. But if you're talking about everything was evolved from a single cell, there is simply no evidence for such a grand claim, and I wish to hear more evidence because I think it's good that we be open to the truth. So I think time will only allow me so much to address the questions that have been raised by Mr. Willie. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Now that I'm done with my prepared statements, I promise to talk a lot slower. Okay, now I need to first respond to that whole agnostic atheist question again. When Samuel said that I'm not certain that whether or not God actually exists. Yeah, that is true. As anybody who is logical, as anybody who prides himself in an understanding of science, I have to say that I'm not certain that God doesn't exist. But I'm as certain as about God's non-existence as I am that if I drop this phone, it will fall to the ground. Right? So gravity is a scientific theory. It's called a theory, and that is how science works. Right? You try and suggest a law for something that happens in the universe, and you repeat that experiment as many times as you can, and you see what results there is. However, because you cannot, even if you find one instance where if I let go of the phone and it doesn't fall to the ground, that is evidence you have to accept. That is what we talk about having an open mind in science. However, there has been billions, trillions, I don't know how many apples that has fallen around trees on the planet Earth for years and years now, and the theory of gravity is pretty much a given, on Earth at least. But yet, at the same time, when science goes outside of the Earth and you start calculating the interactions of various different planets and suns and whatnot, it's not good enough. And therefore, we try to come up with a better explanation, a better calculation, which can actually produce the exact results. That is how science works. Science is not a magic trick, and science understands its own limitation, and science does not make claims which it is unable to show you over and over again. Now this links back to the whole evolution question thing. A lot of people like to use this argument that you cannot reproduce evolution. Well, actually, that is not exactly true. The whole evolution thing is the micro evolution, which you believe in. The doctor says I'm wrong. But the basic idea is this is something which you can actually see. In the viruses which you actually come into contact with all the time, which makes you sick and so on, these kind of things are actually constantly changing. And that is the reason why the science of medicine have to actually adapt and change in order to catch up with how the bacteria is adapting to you. That is evolution. The reason why you have to take so many different medications, the reason why you have to finish taking your antibiotics every day is evolution, which is reproducible. We are not producing it. The world is producing it. No doctor tells the virus, please change so that I have some work to do and so that I can keep earning money. Nobody does that. It happens by nature and nobody has to tell it to do so. That is evolution at work. As for the issue of where life actually originated, admittedly science does not have all the answers yet. But we are making progress towards understanding these things. Right, we sent a probe to Mars a couple of weeks ago, and we're trying to find whether there are actually organic materials there. Inside labs, we have created the common materials which is available on Earth during early Earth-like periods, and we generate situations, running electricity to them, applying heat and pressure and so on, until the organic chemicals which are necessary to start the process of the creation of amino acids happen. And they happen. You get a whole bunch of organic goo, which, given enough time, aeons, millions and millions of years, can actually produce the first basic building blocks of life. And these basic building blocks of life, we believe, given enough time, we will probably be able to create evidence. Again, science does not make a claim immediately before proving it, but we are moving towards it. Right? Probably RNA now, if I'm not mistaken, and then after that, more complex DNA. You can read this. This is all available information, and you should not make claims about this and dismiss it completely before you have gained at least a basic level of understanding. We all know biology in school was generally not paid attention to. The only part which you pay attention to is when your lecturer got to the part about human reproduction. So. Other points. Now, I think one major thing that I have to discuss here is that perspective thing again. The whole atheism versus agnosticism thing. One of the major things it tries to point to you is that God holds a special position in your system of beliefs, in the system with which you use to think about the world. Now, if anybody else were to come to you and tell you something really strange, are there fairies in your garden? Are there little twinkling winged girls flying around in your garden right now? Well, yes, to be technically correct, I would say, yes, I'm open to the possibility that they are there. It is possible, I should be not sure about it. It doesn't work that way. You will immediately say, no. So, the default state of the world is an evidential state. People have to come to you and offer you evidence. If there are fairies in your garden, show one to me, catch one. Show to me every day that the flowers are growing at times when flowers are not supposed to grow, or maybe they eat your leaves or something like that, and there are no rabbits and no animals in that area. You have to provide evidence when you're actually making a claim. And for a lot of people, this inability to see this difference in perspective is actually what makes the difference between an atheist versus somebody who would believe. And another thing you need to think about is, from your own perspective of belief, of presupposing that God already exists, think about all the other people who are presupposing that all the other gods exist. Because you are born, and this is the point I made earlier, because you are born in a specific location in this world. If you're born in the Bible Belt in America, 99% of the time you will turn out a Christian. If you're born in Saudi Arabia, 99% of the time you will turn out a Muslim. You will feel the Muslim God, you will feel, if you're born in India, the Hindu God. How do you then tell yourself or check for yourself whether you're worshipping the right God? Let's assume that I'm not talking about atheism for a moment here. You want to believe in God, you definitely feel something very, very keenly. How do you then justify that? And that is a very important question which you need to answer to yourself when you are talking about a belief. Now, another two things. Enough time. With regards to Bible prophecy and how using the Bible, constantly going back to the Bible in order to prove your own argument, we call this a circular argument. If you want to use the Bible as a definition and as the proof of everything that you hold true in your life, you first have to unequivocally prove to yourself that the Bible is accurate. Nobody should be telling you this. Nobody should be suggesting it to you. You need to take the Bible, you need to read it, you need to know where it came from, you need to know who wrote it, over how long a period of time, how before there was printing presses the book managed actually to be preserved. And you need to answer all these questions satisfactorily to yourself before you can open it and you can say, oh look, this guy said that this prophecy is true. You need to prove to yourself that the Bible is actually accurate before you can actually say that these things are actually prophecies, and then, oh look, it's actually been fulfilled here. This is an example of a self-fulfilling prophecy if you only believe that everything I say is true. Last year I predicted that this year I would buy a tablet. Look, it does not work this way. How do you know I'm telling the truth? Did I write it down somewhere and put a slip of paper in a bank saying that this year I would definitely buy a tablet? Let's forget about the fact that obviously it's my decision. Right? Let's say that he has a phone and I'm saying that this year he'll buy a new phone, and he says, look, there's the phone that right there, and he's telling you that yeah, you predicted that. I would need to show you a proof. Maybe a lawyer had to sign a piece of paper that I wrote last year, or something like that. But this kind of proof is usually not very present in the whole community. How many of you here know where the Bible actually came from? How many of you here know what the languages it was written in? Who translated your Bible for you? How many of you know the actual context of the writings of the Bible? One of the major reasons why is 10 minutes, right? No, oh yeah. No, I'm supposed to have 10 minutes, right? Go 2 more minutes. I actually did this. This is one of the major reasons that I actually came out of theism. I actually checked out the origins of the Bible, and I was trying so hard to convince myself that what the Bible says is true. It is wonderful. It's amazing, some of the things that it says. Back then, I could not see the ridiculousness of some of the things which I actually stated in the Bible. But once I actually came out to it and saw the Bible as another book that may or may not contain truth, that actually has to be proven to me before I actually take its word, the clarity of what is actually written in the Bible became extremely obvious to me. In the same way, when you pick up an encyclopedia, you shouldn't believe everything it says inside. In the same way you pick up a textbook you read in school, you shouldn't believe everything it says inside. Somebody wrote that book. That person did research. I wrote this speech. Some of the things I'm saying here could be lies. You don't know that unless you know me very, very well. And it's the same way when you deal with the real world, you need to apply a certain level of skepticism. That is essentially the only way that the world actually works. And this perspective difference, the ability to throw away all need for evidence and everything else, when you deal with God and God alone, is actually the only thing which makes this difference between atheists and, you could say, most theists. God really, really holds a special place in your heart. And talking about that, I'm scared of the dark. I will admit this. I'm really, really scared of the dark. When I sleep at night, how many of you have watched Supernatural? That nighttime show where somebody is it's a ghost movie where there's this poltergeist who's moving around your house and like moving things around and scaring the crap out of people. Supernatural activity. Paranormal activity. And after I watched that movie, I couldn't sleep for a couple of weeks. It's a phobia. It's a real phobia. Don't laugh at people with phobias. I'm scared. I'm really scared. When I lie down on the bed at night, I can feel a presence behind me. I'm telling you this, I can feel that presence. And this is how your brain is wired. And a lot of the time, people think that your brain, people are more confident in the control you have over your brain than you actually are. Your brain is a series of processes of chemicals, and if I have more time, I'll talk about that later. Thanks.
I want to commend both speakers for their judicial use of time and keeping to it very religiously, if I may say so. Now I must say we get to the interesting part where we get the cross-examination. We will start first with Samuel, who will have 6 minutes to grill Mr. Poe in a series of questions of his own choosing and to show the strength of his position in true logic and reason, and then followed by 6 minutes of Mr. Poe grilling Mr. Neeson in the same way. And if you're ready. Okay, Mr. Neeson will now have 6 minutes.
I'd like to begin by, he mentioned that evolution, Mr. Willie, he mentioned that evolution is proven, that it is true. Now, I agree with microevolution, that that things do evolve, and that things which you illustrated, I do believe in that. In microevolution, but my problem is with macroevolution. How do we explain? How did life begin on Earth? How did we get from an inorganic world to the world of the cell? Before we even go into Darwinism.
Yeah, that is exactly what I was trying to explain. You have an early situation on Earth where there's a bunch of chemicals floating in the waters and so on. We think that it might have been electricity. We don't know for sure. Science doesn't claim to know for sure. And the whole point I made in my first speech was that just because we don't know for sure yet in science doesn't mean that God caused it. One day when we explain it, then God would have caused that. That is a problem. So we don't know yet for sure, but if you want a long explanation, a bunch of chemicals in the Earth, electricity, lightning is very common on Earth in the early days due to the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This will cause some of these chemicals to combine together, and this is the first organic molecules, amino acids and so on, and it has been reproduced in labs multiple times independently using different parameters and so on.
In other words, you're claiming that life has actually been created in labs.
No, that would be going too far. I would say that the basic building blocks of life has been created in labs, yeah.
So because, I understand that, it takes like at least, even based on my limited understanding of science, I would say, it takes about 250 proteins to actually give us basic life forms, living forms. It takes at least about 200 to 300 proteins to do that. But before, in this primordial soup, so you claim, how does this happen? Is there a justification for such claims?
One of the major justification is that there is an aeon of time which it actually takes. Well, amino acids are not complex; they're actually rather simple proteins. Your body, when you eat an egg, it breaks it down into amino acids from the complex proteins and so on. But it takes a very, very long time for these small pieces of things to combine together to become more complex things. And like I said earlier, science doesn't know. And I know you keep pressing me on this, but it doesn't change the fact that regardless of whether science actually knows the answer, the point is that even if science doesn't know the answer, it doesn't mean that you can just apply God to it. It's like saying, you can say two things about it. You can say, I don't know, or God caused it. The two mean the exact same thing, because God causing it explains nothing at all.
Okay. Moving on to my thing. Do you think that, how do you explain paranormal? You mentioned paranormal activity. How do you explain hauntings, demon possessions? I have witnessed myself. I'm a first-hand witness, so as some people here, demon possession, exorcism, shamanism, voodoo, and the powers of black magic. Is there a scientific explanation?
I would explain that if these things were real and that they happen commonly enough and the evidence was sufficient, other than those people present, you would be a millionaire right now if you had actually recorded that. James Randi actually has a $1 million prize. James Randi Foundation has a $1 million prize, which sits out there for anybody who can prove a supernatural activity. If you can blindfold yourself and still read, for example, there's a group around here who is actually doing that. I'm actually pretty curious about that group. They claim to be able to teach children to be able to read without actually looking at any paper. And exorcism, all these are supernatural activities and things like that. There are lots of claims of supernatural activities, but that's the thing. If these things have already been proven, they wouldn't be claims. Like this is water. That's not a claim, it's water. It's things which we know for a fact are just things which we know for a fact. Things which are supernatural, that happens only in very small locations where only a couple of witnesses have actually seen. A lot of the times they can be explained. And I would point out that in a lot of different situations, people actually don't understand what exactly is going on there. Like, for example, I used to say that if God's huge hand were to descend down from heaven one day and point to me and say, "You believe," I would turn into a believer. But nowadays I say that if that would happen, first I would look for God and ask him to assign a psychiatrist to me and check whether I'm hallucinating anything. I'll ask Joshua to check, do you see the same thing over there? And to see whether there's any specific phenomenon. Then I would check whether aliens are here. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. So, let me quickly go through my fourth argument, which I admit is a bit sneaky in the limited time I have. My third question, rather. Do you think I'm delusional by claiming that I've had experience of God, or will you dismiss it as just superstitious, fanciful thinking?
No, I wouldn't say you're delusional. I would say that you have a system of belief which actually makes you more likely to actually believe that. Actually, that's a little bit of a cop-out. Yeah, in a way, by my standards, I would say that you were delusional, but not by society's standards. You see, when we say whether somebody is delusional or not, it is usually by society's standards. I mean, Paul wouldn't say you're crazy. You cannot be classified as clinically or whatnot. This is something which a lot of people believe, and I don't think that you should look down on people's belief. I don't believe that. My own belief structure came out of existence because I built it like, oh, today I will be an atheist, today I will be scientifically literate. It doesn't work that way. I was lucky enough, I would say, to have come from a situation which allowed me to understand it. You came from a different situation.
Right. Thank you. One final question. Do you believe that atheism is scientific? And what justification is there for that?
Atheism is a worldview in a way. It is a position that you take. Whether it works with science, yes, I think it works with science extremely well. That is the whole point. Science is the science of probabilities. It's looking at facts and all these kind of things, and it is based on this evidence. Based on the usual method, we apply evidence to everything else we see in the world that we actually arrived at this position.
Thank you.
Okay, now Mr. Poe will give 6 minutes of prayer. Mr. Poe.
Can a God make a rock so? I'm just kidding. I'm sure you've heard of that one before. Okay, now in all seriousness, why does God who want worship and salvation from mankind, who want worship from and salvation for mankind, stop performing awesome miracles which render this debate completely unnecessary? Why are the awesome miracles only in the Old Testament?
I don't believe that the awesome miracles are only in the Old Testament. In fact, I believe Richard Dawkins accused televangelists for making money out of this. I don't think, like you said, they wouldn't be making money out of it if totally it's false. I mean, the old English saying, there's no smoke without fire.
Hold on. I think we need to define awesome here. Like, when I say awesome, I mean flood the entire earth, for example. Awesome, part the Red Sea, awesome, destroy a city with an angel and turning women into salt and then look at her.
I would think that, again, but won't you agree that awesomeness is also subjective? When I look at something, I feel that it is subjective.
Let's define awesome as the amount of effect it has on the physical world. So, like, huge effect on the physical world. Must move at least a gajillion of molecules, for example.
I believe that God does miracles, but perhaps not to your definition of awesomeness. I have not found any, but I don't think that disproves God in any way. But at the same time, I think there's plenty of evidence that God does miracles even today. And I've witnessed it myself, and I'm sure many people would attest to that.
Okay, let's try another one. God seemed to acknowledge skepticism in the past. Thomas was a skeptic, apostle of Jesus. He was allowed to touch the wounds of Jesus when Thomas didn't actually believe him. God made himself known to Paul. There was a bright light blinded him for a certain period of time to prove that he's God. So since that he is willing to actually do this last time, why not today? I sought him for a bunch of years. Now, unless you're telling me that I did it wrong somewhere, I wasn't honest enough, but that is true for a lot of believers, right? So why not just pop out and say, dude, I'm here, I'm cool.
I think it's a fair question, right? Okay, I think, and I did touch on this in my opening, I have honestly, sincerely asked that question myself. If God was so real, why did He just appear to me in my face? And I think I touched on that question in my opening speech when I said that simply because of the effects of the fall, theologians call it the noetic effects of the fall, whereby even if God is right in front of you, would not know because your eyes have been clouded. You see, in the beginning, Garden of Eden, just let me very quickly go into this. We saw God. Man was able to see God. Man was created to see God. But when sin happens, every way he could actually perceive God has been dulled. And that would be a very quick answer I'm giving to your question in view of time.
Yes, you do. You have at least three more minutes.
Okay, so why do you bother praying? Usually when you pray, you actually ask God to do something. So if you pray and it changes God's mind, then He's not omniscient. If it does not change God's mind, then it's superfluous.
I think I have to speak for myself. Again, I don't pray for God to, do things for me. One of my prayers, and I think my father would attest to this, it would be, God, let your will be done. I think it's wrong when Christians come to God, and we say that, God, do this for me, let me win the car race tomorrow, let me do this. I think we take the idea of God far too cheaply that we ought to.
You don't ask God to save your loved ones and so on?
Well, I think I would do that, but I think sometimes, God has in His mind a desire to do that, and He wants to see whether anyone would be an intercessor to stand in the gap, to pray for the person. Is that a genuine concern we have for others? I think God has already intended to do that.
Okay, now just one last question. How do you apply your sense of willingness to believe in God, the presence you feel, and all these kind of things? How do you not apply this to other gods? How religiously, if you like, have you actually sought out other religions which are similar to yours?
The question is how diligently did I seek out others? I'm doing a master's in theology and comparative religion. That's how serious I did it.
The Christianity?
Yeah, I think I have to choose either one or the other, and I choose Christianity. So again, I do seek, and I think I mentioned to you before this debate itself, that I do seek to understand every religion. I question everything, I leave no stone unturned. I genuinely want to seek the truth. And I don't find, I must say this, I find certain things to be true in other religions. But again, in every error there is also truth in every error. No error is a complete 100% error. There is an element of truth in every error. It's just how much, what is the percentage of it. So I don't find truth to be found in other religions. And when Jesus Christ comes to me and in the Bible and He says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, and the life, no one goes to the Father except through me, I find that to be true. It is, again, coherent with, I feel it is true to me, and therefore I think I have every reason to believe it. Because I also, not just I know it, I reason it is true, I experience it as true as well.
Thank you.
I admit I did ask some sticky questions. But okay, let me look at some of the answers that Mr. Willie provided. When I asked him about, do you believe that is evolution a proven fact? He did say that science cannot prove it conclusively now. But again, I realized that there seems to be a double standard, because I'm supposed to prove. All due respect to him, I think it's not just he's making this. I think that this is generally the agnostic claim as well. The atheist agnostic claim as well. I have to shoulder the burden of proof in order to attest what I say is true. You don't have to. When you're an atheist, you don't have to. You just have to sit in your chair, throw the spanners in my wheels, and I'm accepted to remain standing after that. So I don't think it's a really fair statement. In light of this question of debate today, does God exist? To be honest, I was looking for things, but I do not find any conclusive evidence why God cannot exist or why God does not exist. I know the agnostic will immediately put up their hand at this point and say, that this is not, we believe that, you can't be certain about things. Mr. Willie says he's not certain, yet he is certain. I'm having a great difficulty understanding these things, but I'm sure he has a good reason to explain, to think. Now, he says with regards to paranormal activities, he doesn't, I'm not sure, he says that with regards to paranormal activity, that, he doesn't know, he just believes it's basically, it should be more proof more often. But again, people have died. If you have watched the famous movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, you find it's actually a historical thing. The girl ended up dying. Now, that was a real thing. Now, I'm not claiming that as I won't be so delusional as to claim that it's my argument for it. But at the same time, think about it for a moment. These things do happen. Just because there are no proof of it, you are making a genetic policy. Just because something, the way we come up, just because we happen to be born in a certain place at a certain time, therefore religion is unbelievable. We have no reason to believe in it. This committing a genetic, what we call a genetic policy. Something is wrong because of the origin. The answer is wrong just because of the way it came forth. I don't think this is fair. So I think I would seriously want to hear, more of why. Okay, fair enough. The Christian is told that he has got no evidence to back up his claim, but neither does the evolutionist. And isn't this the claim of special pleading, for that matter? Atheists have got no claim that God doesn't exist. Agnostics have got no claim that evolution is true. He himself, Mr. Willie himself, with all due respect, admitted that. And yet, I am supposed to shoulder the proof, not just to prove the Bible. When I proved the Bible, I proved, and I said, I treated the Bible not as a word of God, I treated the Bible as a historical book, not just to claiming that everything it says is accurate, although I do believe it, but as a historical book. You have prophecies here, it is fulfilled. And yet, it is said that I need to prove even more. But at the same time, you're not hearing the question of does God exist has not been answered. No, it has been almost there but not quite. And there's been no proof. I've not heard one strong argument why God cannot exist, or that there is no a Christian is wrong for believing in God. I've not heard that, and I really wish to be hearing that. Now, to the final thing, he said, the fourth thing. Do you believe that I'm delusional? He said that society would say no, but in a way he would kind of concede that I am delusional to believe in God and so forth. But again, how do you prove such a thing? I think our dear moderator Yoshua mentioned at the beginning of today, every assertion has to be proven. And the assertion that I'm delusional, I know he was just, I don't think he's wrong in any way for mentioning that, but I think there needs to be a proof as to why I'm delusional. I hear him, I feel him, many people here do. Are we all delusional? Now, almost 90%, I don't know whether I got my statistics right, if I'm not correct, this was I think true in the early 2005 or so. That, it said about close to 90% of the world's population believe in the existence of some supernatural being or so. Now, if that's the case, are they all delusional and only the remaining 10% supposedly to be undelusional? And I find this rather confusing, and I really would hope for a genuine explanation on this. So far, these are the things. And with regards now, since I have an extra bit of time here, with regards to the argument that about the space or the flying spaghetti monster as he uses, has there been good evidence? We have to ask the question: has there been good evidence? Just as much. Has there been good evidence just as much as I have given today? Like I've given the argument of biblical prophecy. It has not really been refuted. It's gone unrefuted. My argument from personal experience, it has just said that casually dismissed that I am delusional, but not really given any proof to it. So I would leave it to your discretion, ladies and gentlemen, to see whether the cases I am making here are indeed strong cases, or are there some clumsy cases put up here just for the sake of coming and saying why I'm existing. So I will leave that judgment to your better discernment. So as for now, thank you very much.
I'm starting. Okay, so now first of all, what I would like to say that in the standards of politeness tonight, I think I have lost to Samuel. I'm naturally a very sarcastic person, and I get more sarcastic the more I'm trying to make a point. So I honestly apologize. Samuel has been so good to me. You have been very, very polite, and you have been very, very kind to me in almost every point you're trying to make. So I would like to apologize to you if you don't like all these delusional things and stuff like that. Of course, this is a debate, so unfortunately, these things kind of happen. Okay. Right, and another thing I would like to say is that yes, I am expecting Samuel to shoulder the burden of proof for God's existence. Now, I acknowledge that it's easier for me, it's easier for atheists to actually claim that God does not exist. We do not set out to disprove the existence of God. All we're trying to demonstrate is that existence is a really hard word to say, if you repeat it often enough. We do not try to disprove the existence of God, we're only saying that there isn't sufficient evidence. That is basically all we're trying to say. But reiterating the 4 points which I was trying to make earlier, I was trying to demonstrate a few things, and let's put it in terms of how you actually go about approaching a topic that somebody tries to give you, right, in order to encourage you to believe in this something. And if you want to do this, you actually have to assume that you're not currently a believer. Let's say you're just an average person and you're encountering your first religion. Maybe it's Christianity, whatever it is. But one of the first things that you would actually expect is that it makes sense. Right? This is an argument for philosophy, all the theological argument, cosmological, which we don't want to talk about today. These are all arguments from philosophy. This is like you as an average human being, after seeing the whole world and so much and so on, can you reason it out to yourself? Does it actually make sense to you? And this is actually the first point, that the imperfection of the world does not make sense. Right? So that is the first approach. The second approach is actually to look for evidence. Right? Even if it doesn't make sense, God by definition doesn't make sense, then can you see a piece of evidence in front of you? Can you see really, really strong evidence in front of you that actually says that this is true? When you make an extraordinary claim, you need extraordinary evidence. This is famously popularized by Carl Sagan. Right? And this is actually true in all of science. The reason why you have all the technology you have today and so on is actually a result of this. No scientist publishing in a paper immediately gets acceptance of that theory, even if he has experimental results. Another scientist might want to reproduce it. People want to look at the principles, how it fit into the grander knowledge. This is why we peer review. That is why we don't take everything we say as truth. Don't just read newspapers which report on science. Read science, and there is a significant difference. Newspapers love to sensationalize things. Scientists discovered the origin of life. Actually, we just built a couple of amino acids in the lab, right? So that when he challenged me to actually prove that life actually started in the lab, we never claimed that we have already finished explaining the origin of life. Actually, in my speech earlier, I actually said that we can actually use evolution to explain the complexity of life. The complexity of life is actually what religion has used a lot of the time to try and point to that it can only be designed. The eye is complex, the hand is complex, and so on. But the amino acid is very simple. It's actually a very simple piece of thing. And eventually, as you move along, you can combine these small pieces of thing. There's actually a science field called matter programming right now, where they're trying to build interesting pieces of matter and see how they actually fit together and throw them all in a particular location. Maybe you have self-painting walls in the future. So yes. Yeah, I do expect the burden of evidence, the burden of proof to be on the atheist side when they actually come forward and claim the existence of God. And this is true in theology as well, in evangelism as well. If you expect to come up to an atheist and you expect them to actually take you seriously, you have to come with extraordinary evidence. And stories of exorcisms and things which you cannot reproduce for people, things which happened a long time ago and so on, which is claimed in the same book you claim is true, which claims itself is true. It's really hard. It's a circular argument. You can't actually write a statement which makes sense, because then you go on forever and ever. Now about the delusional thing, I think this is. I have 5 minutes, right, Lisa? Yeah. About the delusional thing, I think this is recorded after all, and it's going to be seen on YouTube maybe in the future. Yes, I have to be honest in that sense. If you ask me by what standard do I ascribe this? You ask for my opinion. This is my personal standard. If I were to start spouting crap tomorrow, I would call myself delusional. If I were to do wrong things which I think are not right tomorrow, I would call myself wrong. And by my standard, but I don't apply my standards to everybody else in the world, right? So I do believe that other people do have a system of belief. I do wish the same way you wish that I could be saved after having been saved before. Again, it's the same thing. You expect me to be saved, and religion has told us a long time, for a very, very long time, that we're all going to go to hell if we don't actually believe. And it's the same thing. By your standards, I'm going to be down there after I die. By my standards, I wish more people in the world would actually wake up. Right? If God was in front of you, you can't see it after the fall. Well, I would say that if logic is right in front of you and it's been there since forever, whether we can see it is just a matter of perspective. Thank you.
Let me begin my closing statement with a story. Story of a man, who dreamt that he died. He dreamt in the night, that he died in a car accident, and the next morning he woke up. He was so convinced that he actually died that he began to tell his wife, that I'm dead. And his wife didn't bother to really respond to it. She thought she was delusional or something. She just ignored him. But after it got quite annoying. He kept insisting, that I'm dead for a period of many days. And sooner or later she could stand it no longer. She took him to a psychiatrist who tried to convince this guy that he was not dead. Tried every method in the book, nothing worked. And finally the psychiatrist tried to convince this guy. He showed him a diagram that only living people bleed. At first this guy couldn't take it, but after some time this guy who thought he was dead conceded. He said, okay, fine, only living people bleed. And when he did this, the psychiatrist whipped out a needle, plunged it into the guy's veins, and as you'd expect, blood gushes out. And psychiatrist is here, he's waiting, for the guy to admit that he's alive, and for all he knew, the guy, just ended up saying, my goodness, I guess even dead people bleed too. So, my moral of the story is that, sometimes I think it's subjective. How much evidence is enough? It's subjective. Regardless of how much evidence you throw in, sometimes people may still want to take issue with you. And I hope that's not the case with all of us here tonight. in response, sometimes, we try to give evidence, but I think the question is not so much that there is no evidence, it is more that it is not enough. And I think that is the question. Now, in response to, and I'm always, Mr. Willie always said I'm quoting from the Bible, and so for now I'm going to change, I'm going to quote an agnostic. An agnostic here who, by the name of David Belinsky, who wrote a book entitled The Devil's Delusion in response to Richard Dawkins' God Delusion. This is what David Belinsky, he's a scientist from Princeton at one time. He's an agnostic, by no means a Christian. I don't agree with everything he says, but this is what he says. In the book Devil's Delusion, David Belinsky says, has anyone provided a proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Has the sciences explained why our universe appears to be so finely tuned to allow for the intelligence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything as long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism in moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, of what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough. Is there anything in the sciences or their philosophy that justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? They don't. Now, I don't claim to believe everything David Belinsky says, but this is an agnostic speaking here. And if you disagree with him, as I said, your issue is with your fellow agnostic, it's not with me. I had two purposes, just in conclusion, I'd just like to say this, I have two purposes in coming to this debate. Number one, as Joanne mentioned, to prove the defensibility of the Christian faith and why there is evidence to believe in God. It is not wishful thinking in a bearded guy up in the skies. That is not the case. There is good evidence to believe it. The question is not tonight so much that there is no God. The question is there is not enough evidence for God. So you cannot disprove God. You just have to be satisfied with an agnostic position that there is a high possibility. There's a possibility that there is no God. There's a high possibility there's no God. Richard Dawkins himself wouldn't want to put a figure on how impossible it is for God to exist. No one would really make that assertion. So, and my second objective in coming to tonight's debate is to actually hear atheism out. I think a lot of times, like he said, we need to read sciences from the science book. We shouldn't read newspaper articles about science. And I think tonight, I am very thankful to all of you from the Malaysian atheists and so forth. You have given me, and I believe all the Christians around here, a chance to actually hear you out. And for that, I'm very grateful. So, my two objectives, to defend the Christian faith, to hear the atheists, I believe I've been successful in both defending the faith and also into hearing the true claims of atheists. So, thank you again, once again, Dr. Kok. Thank you again, Mr. Willie, for and all of you for your commitment in participating in this event. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that the debate tonight has basically boiled down to, like I said earlier, a match between two very different perspectives. One from a pre-suppositionalist perspective and one from a very evidentialist perspective as myself. Now, I admit I've actually come to this debate expecting a very much evidentialist style debate with Samuel, because that is how usually Christian apologists approach this, especially to members outside the faith. But tonight's debate, instead of going point by point and to talk about that, about the points of the debate, it really has boiled down to just one thing, which is how you approach things which are actually told to you. Now, it is very unfortunate that I'm actually coming from this perspective, because this is a perspective which you either have or you don't have. But what is also true is that this is a perspective that you can seek. The same way I sought out Christ when I was earlier. I came from a Taoist or Buddhist background. It's a mix of the two. I sought him out and I really looked at it. I read the translation of the Al-Quran with a very seriousness. I was considering converting at one point in my life. And you need this very serious and very honest and very self-evaluating approach to looking at these things if you want to have a chance of actually understanding how this thing actually works. So at this point, at this stage in the debate, we're going to have to agree to disagree. So basically, when we come to approach this, the way I would look at it is we first look at it from whether it makes sense or not. Imperfection of the world doesn't work for me. Then you look for evidence, you look for what actually is there to show you that everything is true, and that doesn't work for me either. So now what strikes me most about the theist versus atheist debate is basically this. Now imagine that you were born into this world, like the perspective we were talking about earlier, in a religiously neutral environment. Like any other child, you are endlessly inquisitive. To your questions, you're given honest explanations. This usually involves an explanation of physical phenomena, which through science we know a lot about today. For unknown cases, you're given an honest answer, I do not know, followed by a discussion of the possibilities, philosophy if you like. Growing up in such an environment, if one day someone was to walk up to you, and I apologize if this sounds ridiculous to you, but it is meant to sound ridiculous, so there's no other way to put it. If someone was to walk up to you and tell you that he believes that a guy out of space and time waved his hands, or the appendages, and caused everything in it to exist in order to wait 14.6 billion years, after that create a bunch of creatures, get really pissed off with them, mess with their language, flood their planet, pick a group special to him, and order these to murder others in his name, eventually impregnate himself into one of the females in order to get himself killed to be able to forgive these same creatures. If somebody were to come to tell you this story, and you do not have a preconceived notion, you do not have a presupposed tendency towards belief, then you are very likely to declare that this person is not right in the head. Now the unfortunate thing here is that whether an individual is capable of processing and recognizing this fact is contingent on whether he has already been indoctrinated. When I asked a friend I just made in the atheist community, and I don't think he's here, a few months back, what actually made him an atheist? He comes from a Christian background as well. And his answer, in his own very special accent and voice, I read the Bible, man. Many of you will know who that is. Now, two individuals reading the Bible gets vastly different impressions of it. And you need to know this when you personally read the Bible. Two different perspectives can give you two very different readings, depending on what you already want to believe, or whether you're coming from a neutral perspective. Now, the church calls this guidance from the Holy Spirit. Now, I think it is simple gullibility brought about by an insidious thing called religious faith. Because what is faith exactly? What is this feeling which you want to ascribe everything to? Faith is belief in the absence of good reason or evidence. If you start with faith firmly holding to things you already think must be true, then all your reasoning, your actions, your conclusions will tend towards this. This is what religion teaches, that we already know the answers and that the truth is a foregone conclusion. And that if you do not subscribe to this truth, you are damned forever. The fact of the matter is, we don't want to die. We want there to be justice in the world, which obviously has none, and we want to be told that we have a purpose, even though the physical world seems to have no purpose at all. Indeed, the world sucks. But what we want or believe we deserve does not affect truth or reality in the slightest bit. There are positive things to be had from a realist, from an atheist perspective as well. Through evolution, you know that your genes are the winners in the insanely tough competition of life. Not a competition God already jigged in your favor, but a real competition. Think about it, of the uncountably vast number of creatures that ever lived, it was your ancestors that survived. Every single one of them managed to pass down their genes while uncountable others did not. You come from a family of champions, and evolution tells you that, science tells you this. Every single one of us came from this perspective. And I just want to make one last point, although I'm kind of out of time. Now, I personally prefer a worldview which is rooted in reality and evidence. And Andrew Yan, the wife of my great hero, the late astronomer Carl Sagan, had this to say about him. Carl never wanted to believe, he wanted to know. And that is precisely what makes me an atheist. Thank you.